To the Black girl who is longing for true safety, I see you. Hey, it's Kaylin, a licensed clinical social worker and therapist in Atlanta, Georgia, and this is the Black Girl Scene podcast. Welcome back to the Black Girl Scene podcast. We just wrapped up the series on facing your fears, which explored all the ways we can overcome things like the fear of being seen, being vulnerable, and being in true intimacy with others. So if you haven't listened, I want to encourage you to go back, spend some time soaking in those episodes. I think there are some great foundational ideas about vulnerability in there that I don't want you to miss. So throughout that series, I kept mentioning the concept of safety. I mentioned the importance of seeking safety, finding safe people, even being a safe person. So I thought it was fitting to expound further on what safety even means and what it looks like. Before we go deeper, I want to invite you to pause here and ask yourself, when was the last time I remember feeling truly safe? Right. So I want you to sit with this prompt and connect with your body here and really notice not only what you visually recognize about that experience, but also what it feels like in your body. Safety is such a mind, body, and ever evolving dynamic concept. And I think sometimes we think of it as this fixed thing. So that's ultimately what I want to invite us to sit with today. So let's get into it. Typically, I start with defining something, setting the stage for like what safety even is. But I want to start this topic in a bit of a reverse style. And I want to start off talking about what safety is not. I think we're actually a lot better at noticing when we feel unsafe, whether that's the case or not, which I'll expound on a little later. And I often tell my clients that a shortcut to understanding something new is by understanding its opposite. So that's what I'm going to try here. So to set this up, emotional and psychological safety is just as important to our relational well-being as physical safety is important to our physical well-being. Chances are a lot of us recognize what it is like to feel unsafe because we've had one too many experiences with this before, but we probably don't give it the same level of attention that we do as physical safety, right? A car that functions, food on the table, shelter, all of these things. We might notice that. Someone physically threatening our space, we might notice that, but we don't always pick up on what it's like to be in an emotionally unsafe situation, even though we might understand and connect with what that feels like. And so we're familiar with those signs of being unsafe. We know what it's like to feel uneasy. We know what it's like to feel on edge, distrustful, scared, anxious, uncared for, undervalued, so many painful emotions and experiences, right? We're familiar with them and we know that they do the opposite of making us feel connected and secure. And there's a lot of literature that really supports just how important emotional safety is not only to our relationships, but also to our physical health as well, because it ultimately is tied to that stress response that can lead to things like chronic mental health concerns and chronic health conditions. So it's really important that we do this work. And again, I understand that a lot of us have had experiences where we know what it feels like to feel unsafe and what it feels like to live with that in your body for so long. A cool way to summarize safety is that we don't feel those things. We don't feel what I just described could be associated with an experience of feeling unsafe, but also that we have an experience of trust with someone, that they ultimately have the goal of respecting your wellness and they use their relational tools to fulfill this goal of your wellness and not harm you. That doesn't mean that ruptures or conflict, misunderstandings, even disappointment won't happen. It just means that the person's ultimate goal is to not harm you, control you, or disregard you. And they're going to use their relationship skills to protect and advance your well-being. That's why I love to reference what Bell Hooks centered in her book, All About Love. If you haven't read that yet, please do. It stemmed from the work of psychiatrist Scott Peck, where he drew from the work of Eric Fromm. And he defined love as the will to extend one's self for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. And so Bell Hooks really centers that in her understanding of love and care. And I like to summarize it as being committed to someone's highest good. To me, that is so sacred, and it's such a strong compass for treating someone in ways that will protect their well-being. To me, that's ultimately safety. So if you need a shorthand way of describing safety, that's something you can rely on, right? A space or a person, an experience that is committed to your highest good and your ultimate well-being. When we are in dynamics that don't do this, we ultimately experience anything from discomfort to a sense of danger that our well-being is on the line. So for example, being in community is a part of how we experience well-being. So it makes sense that if we feel at risk for things like rejection or abandonment, we may feel intense fear. That in an evolutionary, biological, psychosocial, spiritual way impacts our well-being. So our brains and bodies will code that as a threat. So some high-level themes and features of being in an unsafe dynamic could be described as it's unpredictable, inconsistent, unreliable. There's a goal of seeking control over instead of sharing power. There's a presence of harm and an absence of protection. There's a lack of visibility, right? So you do not feel seen. If you are not seen, you cannot be safe. And there's a lack of permission to be the self. There's a lack of boundaries, clear structure, clear roles in the relational dynamics. There's a lack of resilience, and there's no room for repair. And if I didn't say this before, this experience of safety, I think sometimes we can connect it very well to romantic partnerships, but this is true in family relationships, in friendships, in the workplace, in society, in the grander community that we're living in. All of these things apply in a myriad of relational dynamics. So some examples of dynamics that might leave us feeling unsafe: the communication patterns might be inconsistent. And that's not even just like, oh, I don't always hear from you. It might be, sometimes I hear from you, sometimes I don't, and there's no true pattern, or you're not able to kind of share when you're unavailable. You just kind of disappear, or you choose silence and icing folks out or stonewalling when you're upset. And that's a way that you navigate challenging emotions, which leads well into conflict is unhealthy, maybe even dangerous, or non-existent. I think it's kind of easy to pick up on if someone's yelling or being truly, truly harmful in conflict, that's not safe. But we don't always notice that if we're not engaging in conflict at all, that's also not an experience of safety. A lack of clarity is a lack of care, and it models this experience of absence. So that's important there as well. Positive, good, or reinforcing experiences are conditional. So at any point when someone is upset or they're displeased, they may withdraw their energy. They may not celebrate you. And I want to name here, that's why sometimes benign versions of some of what I'm saying can still be triggering. So if you recognize that someone withdrawing their energy when you did something they didn't like was something you experienced growing up, then you might have in your romantic relationships as an adult an experience where your partner says, hey, I need a minute. I can't do this right now, or I need a minute before we finish this conflict. But to you, it feels like they're abandoning you, right? Even though the person just needs to cool down or needs some time to collect their thoughts. That's why this open communication is so important, because it makes sense that you might feel triggered if withdrawal was a tool to harm you at some point. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's happening again. And we'll get to that later too. Another example, you do not feel free to be yourself. You tend to end up masking a lot, or morphing yourself into who you need to be to experience acceptance. And lastly, if you do show up authentically or in your best interest, that might lead to guilt or shame, or leads to other threats to your emotional and relational safety. So again, someone withdraws, someone stops talking to you, someone stops offering you care and support, someone becomes upset or jealous, all of these different reactions when you show up authentically or within your best interest. I also think it's important to name here that being safe does not necessarily mean that no one ever leaves, or that a relationship never ends. Sometimes a relationship ending is the safest thing for you and others. Sometimes it does make sense for a friendship to end. Sometimes that chapter of our life has passed us. Sometimes the romantic relationship you're in, it makes sense for it to end. It's less about never having those experiences, but more about how you break up, how a friendship ends. Were you able to engage in repair? How did you transition in and out of each other's lives? That's a big piece of where safety can be baked in. And it feels good here to remind us that this is a mind-body experience. So we get a lot of material growing up about how relationships go and what feels safe or unsafe to us. And ultimately, our bodies start to code this. So notice how you feel when I'm even talking about some of these experiences. Maybe you can relate to being iced out or experiencing a hot and cold relationship with your caregivers. That might have brought up that feeling of a pit in your stomach. You might be feeling anxious right now, right? Knowing that you have to hide in order to stay in a relationship, that might leave you feeling really heavy, really gray. These sensations are your guides. These sensations are what help you connect with how safe or unsafe an environment is for you, especially if it feels really nebulous or it feels really challenging to put your finger on exactly what's going on. These feelings are not necessarily facts, right? Our feelings are always valid, but they're not always factual. They're not always representative of reality. Going back to that last example, you may notice that when your partner needs space, that you feel abandoned, but that doesn't mean you are being abandoned. And later, we're going to talk a little bit about how that's still good data, because although that may not be what's happening, you get to use that information to take care of yourself and to communicate what your needs are in that space. So I just wanted to pause and reorient ourselves back into our bodies as we think through what safety and a lack of safety look like, which brings me to what safety does look like. And I'm hopeful that talking about what safety didn't look like, that it's starting to connect some dots for you about what safety does look like. We can name those same themes from earlier in the positive or in the opposite and paint a pretty strong picture of what safety is. So safety is stable, it's consistent, it's reliable. It seeks to share power, not control, not exert control over others. There's an absence of harm and a presence of protection. There is visibility and permission to be the true self. You do feel seen, so you can feel safe. And I want to name here, if it isn't clear through a lot of what we've been talking about in these episodes, being seen is connected to safety, because if you cannot be who you are, you cannot experience true trust and love, because you don't know if this person really loves you if you are not really you. And we spend so much more time masking and so much more time trying and exerting effort to sustain something rather than actually showing up in your true self and showing up as your true self and getting your real needs met. So being seen is truly the door to being safe, the same way being safe is the door to being seen. And some other pieces of what safety looks like: there are healthy boundaries and structure. There's clarity on the nature of the relationship and each role that each person plays. If we're thinking about this in the context of dating, I want to also switch this to familial. Your relationship with your parents changes so much over the lifespan. In the very beginning, you're completely dependent on them. And in a lot of cultures, especially for us Black girls, as time goes by, they may end up being completely dependent upon you. So we transition from these authority figures and these caregiver roles to sometimes mirroring friendships and then switching into another yet different dependent role with caregivers and authority figures. So there's so much that gets baked into the importance of knowing how to renegotiate a boundary, renegotiate the nature of relationships, and renegotiate your roles in relationships, because as we change, so must our relationships. Which brings me to my last main theme of safe relationships, but I think is probably one of the most important, is that there is a presence of resilience and ability to bounce back from conflict. There is room for repair. And the experience of safety in your body feels just like how it might sound right now, very steady, very calm, very present and grounded. And there's an experience of trust. So we're not disconnected and just empty, or we just don't feel bad. I think sometimes because emotions are challenging for us, feeling nothing sometimes can feel good. But in safe dynamics, you feel your emotions, but you can calmly connect with them, experience them, and process them. It's also not just euphoric or these high highs, because that tends to be followed up by those low lows. That's usually a product of unhealthy environments as well, where you may be in a push-pull dynamic or that hot and cold dynamic where your reward system spikes when you get some of what you need, and then it crashes when it goes away, right? That might be for some of us who are used to, or we can relate to, the experience of intermittent or inconsistent needs being met over time. It's that gambling reward system. You're more enticed by the idea of winning than the actual reward itself, or you were used to the crumbs you got, and so something felt better than nothing. That's sometimes where that comes from, and it's really important to be watchful of that. When you get your needs met consistently, however, your nervous system gets a chance to experience less dramatic ups and downs, and it experiences more fulfilling emotional ebbs and flows. And so even sometimes when we have those not so great emotions, when we can do it in a way where we're experiencing it and we're not becoming it, getting flooded by it, feeling like we can't feel it at all, we're not safe to feel it, and we must detach or dissociate, that even can end up being our path toward well-being, because we can just experience our emotions. So those are some ways to think about safety and what it feels like in the body. So how do we find this? How do we experience this? A big key of experiencing safety is by finding safe people and being a safe person. A space is only as safe as the people in it. And it takes more than just the people you find. It takes you too. It starts with you, because if we are not able to create safety within, we may struggle to sustain it around us. If we are being unkind and critical of ourselves, we may struggle to set boundaries with others who do the same. If we do not value ourselves, we may struggle to hold others accountable for doing the same. If we do not know how to give ourselves permission to say no, then we may find ourselves in spaces with people who do not respect our boundaries at all, right? So many of these behaviors we've talked about, when we're thinking about the ways that others treated you, that also applies to the relationship you have with yourself, right? So it's like, do you listen to you? Do you honor your needs? Do you self-abandon? Or have you learned to stay? Have you learned to stay with yourself? Do you practice grace, or are you avoiding healthy confrontation with yourself? All of these things are the things that cultivate trust with someone else, and they cultivate self-trust too. Then once we learn to cultivate safety within, we not only recognize it in others, but we can tolerate it too. It can be really hard to accept safety when it doesn't match our inner experiences or what we know about ourselves, or what we've come to know about ourselves based on our past experiences. So you might be thinking, okay, this is really hard. And you are right. I usually mention this work is not easy, and it is work that you get to do with others, trusted professionals, trusted friends and individuals. It's hard, but it's possible. So I hope you give yourself the grace that you need as you start this journey of seeking safety. Right? So it's not a solo journey. It just starts with us. Once we identify safety within, then we can start to allow this to guide us to finding the safe people and safe relationships as well. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about what safe relationships do look like. And before I get into that, I do want to remind us that safety does not mean being perfect. It does not mean the absence of conflict. It doesn't even mean the absence of being triggered. Throughout this episode, I've tried to be really careful about using the word harm when we discuss feeling unsafe, because I believe that as humans, we will get hurt or be disappointed, and we will also hurt and disappoint others because we're human and we make mistakes and life is hard. So I distinguish that from harm, which feels different. When I say hurt, I'm thinking about hurt as a human experience when our expectations go unmet, but we're ultimately positioned to get our needs met and to experience well-being, right? But harm threatens our well-being. We can be hurt and be healthy, but harm and health cannot coexist. So when we talk about what safe relationships look like, it's not the absence of challenging things. And if you've been following Black Girl Scene on Instagram, you may notice that I say a lot that safety and comfort are not the same thing. We might, in fact, we will experience discomfort. Opening yourself up to someone else, sharing your feelings, disagreeing, having conflicting needs that you need to figure out, changing roles because things are changing in your life. That's uncomfortable, but it doesn't mean that you're experiencing harm. On the flip side, you might be very comfortable with someone who is hot and cold with you because you don't have to open your heart to them as much, and they remind you of something and you're really into them, even though they're not giving you what you need. That might actually be really comfortable for you, but you're experiencing a lot of emotional harm around rejection and inconsistency and not feeling chosen, right? So that's why I think it's so important to distinguish between the two. So when we think about what safe relationships look like and what safe people do, keeping in mind that we are distinguishing hurt from harm, a few things come to mind. So yes, you will have conflict, but you will feel safe to disagree. And the tools that are used have the goal of reaching repair that is mutually beneficial, right? So when things go wrong, there's always a goal of getting things, quote unquote, right again. That's repair. And repair is so powerful. I'm going to do a whole episode on repair at some point. Sometimes when we think about trauma, it wasn't the fact that a bad thing happened that caused the trauma. It was because there was no repair or no attempt to repair afterward. That's what therapy is. Therapy is helping you repair and complete things that happened that we never got the chance to before. So that's another way to think about it. Also, in safe relationships, there are open lines of communication. You feel comfortable being yourself, and so do others. You have boundaries and structures. The people in the relationship with you have boundaries and structure. You all understand your role and feel safe negotiating this role and sharing these boundaries with one another, right? So we're not codependent in a way where I'm taking on multiple roles in the relationship or someone's overly dependent and the other person is enabled. All kinds of dynamics where those lines get crossed and the role confusion pops out and people don't feel safe to exert a boundary. You don't fear things like manipulation or gaslighting. Everyone's honest up front and fully accountable for their own truth and behaviors. And so this doesn't mean that someone may never mess up, but this may mean they say, okay, I messed up. You and others are reliable, dependable, and consistent. And again, that doesn't mean that, they're never going to cancel on you ever. It might mean that they can be honest with you about if they need to cancel, and they'll make an effort to reschedule, and they'll acknowledge the fact that that might have disappointed you, right? But then again, which I'm about to get to, you being a safe person, maybe that also means that it's not that you can't get upset. It's not that you can't be disappointed, but you maybe can acknowledge that you're disappointed and you have the tools to manage your emotions on your own while communicating to your partner or whoever this person is, how you feel and what you need from them to experience repair, right? So that's a little bit of the both and there that I wanted to share. And another big one, I think that we cannot discuss safety without discussing power dynamics. There's a goal of shared power, and folks are able to manage their ego by prioritizing the relationship. And that's true even if the relationship needs to end. And so what I mean by that is, in the relationship, we're not talking about a friendship where one person gets all the spotlight and the other person's just kind of a supporting character, right? And maybe even both parties can acknowledge that, hey, if this power imbalance is present, that we both feel like our egos are bruised or there are things that we need, but we care about this relationship. So we want to figure out how to share the power, how to share the load, how to share the space in a way that works for both of us. And if we can't find a way that it works for both of us, that we can honor that need by experiencing the distance or the ending that this time might be asking for. So that's what I mean by that. And I could go on and on and on for days about what this looks like, but I think this is a solid foundation for safety and a great starting point to think about cultivating more safety for yourself and others. And so I think I mentioned that not only do we want to cultivate safety within, not only do we want to find safe people, we want to be safe people. So all of these things that I just spoke about as things you'll experience in a safe relationship, the hope is that that is what you will also offer as an experience in a relationship, that you will be reliable, you will be dependable and consistent, that you will have a goal of repair, that you will use your relational skills for the sake of repair and for the sake of someone else's well-being, that you will work on your communication, that you will work on living in your true authentic self and not only allowing people to see you, but seeing others. All of that are behaviors that we want to work on within ourselves and with others. I think I gave this example in the last episode of fearing intimacy, but some of the things that we do that make us feel safe, they're just protective strategies that we learned when we were younger and had less resources, and they still may create an experience of unsafety for others. You probably learned to shut down when you did not feel cared for, because that's all you could do. You couldn't voice your experiences and your emotions and your needs in the home without experiencing more harm. And now as an adult, can we know that we can build the tools to talk about how we feel when we do not feel cared for, instead of then withdrawing and stonewalling and leaving someone else in an experience of abandonment? That's what I mean by being a safe person. And so I think it's really important. And again, this is where therapy is invaluable, and not just individual therapy, not even just the somatic therapies I've talked about, such as EMDR and brain spotting, but also group therapy. And I may do a mini episode one day about group therapy, because group therapy is what I believe to be the bread and butter of how we heal our relational wounds in a therapeutic clinical space. I love group. It is so powerful, and I'll tell you more about it. But if you hear about groups, and if you are listening to this during a time when I'm offering a group, I want you to deeply, deeply, deeply consider joining one. Again, like I said, I will likely talk about this in another episode. And if you're listening to this and I've already made this episode sometime in the future, please go listen to it. I will make sure to add it to the show notes, because group therapy is just how you model all these things that we've been talking about in a way that's really hard to do in individual therapy. Individual therapy is still a relational space where you can work on these tools in real time. But because the therapist is so much of the container and the facilitator, like we're in it with you and we're going to use ourselves, but because we're such a container and a facilitator, we don't really get to join in the process in the full way that other group members do, right? So I just wanted to put that out there, that you can keep building all this insight and working on these tools and doing a little bit of here and now processing with your individual therapist. But if you really want to go deep and work on these relational skills, try out a group. Right. So safety is a practice. It's dynamic. It takes learning over time, and it's an art more than it is a structured process with a fixed outcome. Because I would say it's an art and a science, but it's not fixed, and it doesn't have this destination where you're like, aha, I have made it. I am safe. And these spaces are safe. It's a journey. It's ongoing. It's daily, and it's dynamic. We have to keep coming back to it, and we can set intentions for safety, knowing that as humans, we may make our mistakes and others might too. But again, if that goal is repair, then we can keep coming back to the practice of cultivating safety within, and then allowing it to be sustained and experienced with others. As always, I want to encourage you to sit with this more through an activity. In the last episode, I mentioned making an intimacy map where you identified the ways that you became fearful of intimacy, but also the ways that you want to start opening up to intimacy. I want to invite you to do the same with safety. So create a map or a list or any visual representation of what safety looks like for you and get specific, right? So instead of just saying, this space has healthy communication, if you know communication has been a vehicle for harm for you in unsafe relationships over time, I want you to try naming something like, I've experienced a lot of yelling and screaming in communication with others, and my safety looks like calm, steady voices and regulated conversations, even when both or all parties are upset. Right. So taking the time to personalize this not only helps you get really clear, but it also helps you process a lot of what harmed you and make room for what will be healing for you. All right, so there's so much more I could talk about here, but I'm going to pause here, and I really hope that this was helpful for you. And if you enjoyed it, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share both this and the Scene Sunday newsletter with someone you love. I hope that this episode and the information in it serves as a companion to you as you begin or continue the work of seeking safety as a practice. And I hope you can use this to continue cultivating the relationships you desire and deserve. And with that, I want to close by saying to the Black girl who is seeking the safety you never had and always wanted, I see you. You always deserved it. And my wish for you is that safety becomes your norm, not an exception. Until next time, take care. Thanks for tuning in to the Black Girl Scene podcast. This podcast is meant for information purposes only and is not meant to substitute for medical advice. Although I'm a licensed therapist, this podcast does not establish a clinical relationship with you, the listener, nor does it replace a relationship with a licensed mental health professional. For more information and resources on finding a therapist or support, please visit www.blackgirlscene.com/support.